So at the beginning of this year, I let the Niche Pursuits community know that I was looking to invest in some small companies. I had lots of people reach out, but the very first investment that I made this year was in Iridium Hosting. Dustin Hyle is the founder of Iridium Hosting, which is a dedicated WordPress host. But in addition, they offer WordPress maintenance plans that do plugin audits, look at security issues, do small WordPress fixes, and even will look at your email deliverability. During this interview, we talk a lot about how you can do those things on your own. So if you want to speed up your site, pass core web vitals, if you want to optimize your images so that your host is not storing multiple copies of images unnecessarily, and do other small fixes and plug-in tweaks to make your site perform as best as possible, you will want to listen to this interview. In fact, Dustin has helped me out on my website with a couple of different things. He tweaked some plugins for me to take care of some caching issues, and he also looked at my email deliverability. And so that's another service that he does offer. But again, if you listen to this interview, you can hear all the steps that he goes through to make sure that emails hit the inbox and overall so your site performs as best as possible. So if you want to check out Iridium Hosting, you can go to nichepursuits.com/Iridium. Again, that's nichepursuits.com/Iridium. Now, even though I am a small equity owner in Iridium Hosting, I am not an active owner. Dustin runs the operations of the company. And even if you're not interested in going with Iridium Hosting, that's just fine. I really do think that if you listen to this interview, you're going to have a lot of takeaways that you can apply to your site to optimize your WordPress site and even maybe improve your email deliverability. So with that, I hope that you enjoyed the interview. Thank you. Hey everyone, it's Spencer Hawes here, founder of the Niche Pursuits podcast. So I recently read a Twitter thread asking about the most underrated strategy in SEO. One of the most common answers given was internal link building. The reason? Well, sometimes people put so much emphasis on external links, they forget that not only do internal links provide relevancy and SEO benefits, but that Google actually encourages you to build internal links. Now, I get it. Building internal links can often feel time-consuming and boring. And that's why I created Link Whisper. Link Whisper is a powerful WordPress plugin that makes building internal links so much faster and easier. You can quickly get relevant internal link suggestions as you write, and with the simple check of a box, add one or multiple internal links to your articles. And perhaps my favorite time saver is the ability to see how many internal links all my articles have, and to quickly get new internal link suggestions to articles I want to boost in Google. With comprehensive internal link reporting and the ability to add links with the simple check of a box, I can't even imagine going back to building internal links manually. Link Whisper is by far the most powerful, effective, and easiest to use internal link building tool out there. Give it a try, and if you don't agree, I'll give you your money back, no questions asked. In fact, for podcast listeners only, I'm offering a $15 off discount. Just go to linkwhisper.com and use discount code PODCAST at checkout to save $15. So as the creator of Link Whisper, I might be a little biased, but I highly recommend that you head over to linkwhisper.com today to check it out. Again, that's linkwhisper.com, and be sure to use discount code PODCAST at checkout. Thanks again. Hey, Dustin, welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast.
Hey, Spencer. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. And we have a little bit of history that we'll jump into here in just a second. But by way of introduction, maybe you can just tell people a little bit about yourself. And in particular, what were you doing professionally before you started Iridium Hosting?
Yeah, so I have a background in IT. I've kind of done all aspects of IT from desktop support. I've been a network engineer. And then most recently a server engineer. So kind of doing things from the IT side of things, and then now going into the hosting. That came about a little bit because of the background that I had doing WordPress on the side, to make money online type of blogs and things like that. So,
hmm So on the side, you were starting your own blogs or you were helping other people with theirs?
so I was starting my own little sites and then also building websites for people like locally and things like that.
Okay. So using your technical knowledge to, yeah, help people build a website. And you, of course, were figuring out the ins and outs of hosting, and with your technical expertise, I'm sure you saw maybe some gaps in the market or some needs in the market. Maybe give us an idea. Why did you start a hosting company?
Yeah. So um, actually, it was kind of a long, long process, overnight success kind of deal. But yeah, so I originally had seen like niche pursuits, but also smart passive income. Pat Flynn, he was, back in the day, he was posting his monthly income reports, and I was seeing just huge numbers on the hosting side,
Yep.
and I was like, "Ooh, that sounds great." And I was like, okay, like I know servers and things like that. But when I started looking at the numbers, it like deterred me from hosting because almost as an affiliate, in many of the cases, you would make more money up front. So, like, if you were promoting someone else's hosting, you were actually, in many cases, better off unless you had the long, looking at it from the lifetime value of the customer. And so back then, I started doing the some like teach you how to start a blog type stuff, and did some affiliate there instead of promoting my own hosting back
hmm
then. And then did that for a little bit, and then heard about WP Curve back in the day, uh,
Yep.
and their managed services, and I was like, "Ugh," I really like that. Like I like that more than doing full build outs because you're waiting on clients for their images, or they want to get their logo redone at the same time as their website, so you're waiting on this or that, and it's just a long drawn out process that I decided I didn't really enjoy.
hmm
So I was like, okay, well, you can just take the bite sized pieces of that from the technical side, and that gives you a maintenance plan, just kind of like what WP Curve was doing. So I watched that for a while, and I kind of started that doing that up on the side of that, and it was a couple years ago now that I came across Mayanna at Blogade, and she on one of her like live streams had mentioned that the person that was doing like their email setups was no longer doing that for them, and so I just reached out and said, hey, I could do that. Kind of fell in line with the managed service that I was doing there. Um, and then talking with her, she was like, all these hosts are doing this wrong, that wrong, all different types of things. And I'm like, okay. And so I was just like taking notes, all the things she said that, hosts were doing wrong. And then I was like, okay, well, I can start a hosting company. I kind of already thought about it, previously, but I was deterred due to, the money.
Right.
And so I basically started a hosting service. Initially, the initial server setup was taking all the check boxes she said that other hosting companies were doing wrong, and I, you know, did it right, I guess. And I've kind of built on it from there. And then starting the hosting has actually um, really grown the managed services side of it.
Right.
And so the growth on the managed services side that has more margin, and that allows me to offset the lower margin on the hosting.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just to encapsulate what you said there, right? You were looking at, oh, there's a lot of money to be made in hosting, but then you realized as an affiliate, you might make more than the hosting company does, at least in the short term, right? If you're willing to
Right.
hold on for a few years and the customers stick around, yeah, then it starts to get profitable,
Right.
right? On the hosting side. But the managed service, doing simple WordPress fixes and maintenance of a WordPress site, that had a little bit higher margin. That's how you started.
Right.
How did you get kind of your first customers for that, like the maintenance packages or
It
you
it
know the
was mo
maintenance?
it was mostly word of mouth,
Okay.
and, I'm in a lot of different, like, blogging groups. I bought probably every course there is about WordPress or make money online, and, just reached out to people who in the different groups said they needed help with this or that, and
Okay. They'd have technical issues. My
yeah.
site's broken. You say, hey, I can help you out.
Yeah, and
That type thing.
Google is great for creating work for people to do. Like SSL certificates, Core Web Vitals. Like every couple of years, there's some big thing that people need to do technically to their sites, and so when those things come, it creates a good opportunity for managed services.
Yeah, exactly. And so you started doing some managed services, and then you said Mariana, is somebody that you connected with and kind of open the door for the opportunity of hosting in a
Yep.
way,
Yep.
right? Like you're already doing this. She's going to start referring some customers that, she trusts you and you now you have a hosting service, so you can do the whole package, right?
Right.
If you will. And so maybe just briefly explain, you kind of already had, but maybe explain the services that Iridium does offer in terms of, hosting and the WordPress maintenance, just so
Sure.
people have an idea of what that is. We're not going to spend a ton of time here. We're going to spend a lot of time on other things that listeners, I think, will find interesting, how they can fix their blogs, speed up their blogs, common errors to look for, that sort of thing. But just initially, yeah, you built this company. What does Iridium kind of offer, and why is it a little bit different?
Yeah, for sure. So Iridium obviously is a hosting company. I focus only on WordPress. You can obviously run other apps on top of my hosting, but everything is tweaked and made for WordPress performance, WordPress security. Um, and then outside of the hosting, we have managed services, two plans. We have one that's just doing regular updates and backups. And then we have a full managed plan, which is the updates, backups, but also it includes like making a full IT department for your blog, basically, so that you can just focus on the content and not have to worry about anything technical. So, like when you need to go add Google Analytics 4 to your site, you just send an email and say, "Hey, I need Google Analytics 4 added," or Core Web Vitals came up. I'm not scoring as good as I should. Send an email and it's taken care of. So you
Yep.
don't have to think about it.
Yep. Or if you get those notifications in Google Search Console that your review snippet is no longer working properly or
Yeah,
something, right? That's
yeah,
probably something you can look at and go, oh yeah, this plugin is not working properly. Let's update it or get a new one or whatever.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Or
it's just send
things.
an email to your tech department,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically, but
Things
for your
probably
blog.
more complicated than that, right? Like all I know how to do is change a plugin or update a plugin, but I'm sure there's more complicated requests than that come in.
For sure.
So, as a blogger, and you already mentioned, looking at Smart Passive Income, Pat Flynn, and the amount of money that he made on hosting commissions, like there is a lot of money to be made, like offering Bluehost, right? We've all heard of affiliates making tens of thousands of dollars a month, right? Just sort of
Right.
offering Bluehost or other kind of discount hosting offers. However, some of the companies like Bluehost are cheap, usually for a reason, and can come with risks. So, what security risks do you see that are commonly happening on discount hosting like Bluehost?
So one of the biggest things that I see is having add-on domains on your account. So like if you go into your cPanel, when you generally sign up for a hosting account with most hosts, that hosting account gets bound to your whatever domain you've initially set up. But then you can go, and a lot of these hosts, they allow you to have multiple sites on one account.
Mhm.
Well, they do that with the add-on domain function. Well, there's no like division in where the files are stored between those add-on domains and your primary domain. And so, like, if one of your sites gets compromised in any way, there's no division there, and it will spread. It can easily spread to all of them. And so what I've done to make it separate and different at Iridium on the shared side um, is technically all of the plans that we have that are multiple, they're a reseller plan instead of a single plan with add-on domains. It's a reseller plan. So every single account is separated. So you won't have a situation where one site can get infected and then it can spread to other sites on the account. So that's one of the things that sets it apart. Um, Also, we're doing light speed. Some other hosts are doing that too, but on the far budget side, you aren't getting light speed and things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've had a number of my own sort of horror stories, if you will, with security issues, or a lot of times it's because things are maybe outdated, right? But a lot of times issues can arise, like you said, because of the host itself. Is there any other sort of horror stories that you've heard about from sites that were hosted on either Bluehost, not to pick on them, but or other discount hosting?
Yeah, I mean, the um, no, they don't generally educate on the processes and how their stuff works. So, like for example, many hosts when they offer backups, like those backups are stored on the exact same server as your site. So if the server itself goes down, like there's a problem there. And
Mm,
so like one thing that I do, and I even do this with all of my managed customers, the managed customers, like I do offsite backups, regardless if they're on my hosting or if they're on other hosting, because I do management for people no matter what hosting that they're on. And I do offsite backups, and people are like, oh, well, my host provides backups. Well, yeah, but if their entire infrastructure goes down, like that's not really a separate copy. It is a separate copy, but as soon as their hosting goes down, you're going to lose your hosting. Like
yeah.
your site's gone. So even with my own, like um, people that are hosted on me, I still do backups offsite. So that's another thing that some of the other ones might not tell you about, that your backup's not actually a safety net
Right.
for the whole host. So
Yeah, no, I mean, that's obviously smart for you to do, and maybe, I guess, scary. I mean, there's so many things that I don't know about technically, right? Like, at least when I first started a website, oh yeah, they're a hosting company, go with it, right?
yeah.
it's great. But then there's a lot of these sort of unwritten things, or things that you don't know about, that maybe could cause issues down the road. And part of that, like you mentioned, is you have tweaked your servers on Iridium to be specifically for WordPress. Why is that important? Maybe explain to somebody without a lot of technical knowledge, like why does hosting specifically for WordPress exist? Like why does that need to happen?
So WordPress is a little bit unique in that it is PHP for like the front end and the files, but it's backed by a database. And so generally it's a SQL database. And those two things interact. And when a new page is, unless it's fully cached, when a new page is requested at the browser, it's going in and loading the file, and then it's going and asking for the contents to put in that file from the database. Um, and so it's different from like a static site where the whole like HTML file is just in one file. And generally speaking, um, having to go to do a database query for everything is slower. And so there's things that you can do to increase the performance there. And caching, while it is a good solution, there's a lot of situations with WordPress where you can't have caching. So like you should have it on the front end of every site. But let's say you are doing WooCommerce too. Well, if you cached everything in WooCommerce, you'd go and try to add something to cart, and it would show you an empty cart because
Hmm.
the cart would have been cached instead of updating real time what's in that. And so doing things like adding PHP workers so that um, it makes it where multiple users can come to the site and it's not going to totally just destroy the server. Um, so just thinking about the different things that you need to deal with it having a database, and then uncacheable situations.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you're able to actually do some of those things that other hosts wouldn't do, I guess, right? Because you're thinking about WordPress first
Right.
and making those tweaks that will make a site faster and perform better.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know over the years, you've seen a lot of security risks, you've seen a lot of problems. Um, and what are some of the worst maybe security problems that you've seen dealing either with client sites or just a friend that had wants you to look at their site? What are some of those things that people should really be looking out for, and what are some of those worst problems that can happen?
So a real big thing to have is you need to have a web application firewall. And so the probably the most popular and well-known one for that is Cloudflare.
Hmm.
So Cloudflare is a CDN, which can increase performance by loading files closer locally to wherever you are. But they also have a firewall built into that, and so that can take any security hits and kind of stop it before it even gets to the host.
Okay.
And then on the hosting layer, um, you want to have uh, application firewall as well. So, and actually, back to what sets Iridium apart, a lot of hosts, when people have issues with the firewall, they just tell them to turn it off, and that is a solution to get your tickets to go down on the support side, but it's not a solution to keep you secure. And so, one thing that I spend a lot of my time doing is actually working with the clients to figure out what's causing maybe a false positive or blocking, and we get that resolved so that we can maybe temporarily turn off the security just to get things working again. But then after we find the root cause, then we can turn all the security back on with maybe making a small exception for what was the issue.
Right.
So, but back to your question on things that I see, biggest thing I see is outdated plugins.
Hmm.
People will go on like Theme Forest or Code Canyon is their plugin version of it.
Yep.
And, they'll buy a plugin or they'll buy a theme and it comes with, free updates for a year or something like that. And then they just let it expire. And so they don't keep up on their WordPress updates. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I see is just an out of date plugin causing some type of vulnerability.
Yeah, and so those vulnerabilities, is it like hackers are able to access the site? Like, what do you see happening? I mean, spam added to the site, or
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll see like ads kind of getting placed, but it won't be, the client's, ad network. It will be like ads that were placed by whoever got into the site.
yeah,
Um, if email's turned on at the host, they'll send out email as that particular thing. And that could be just as sending out spam, but it also could be sending out phishing campaigns because, um, they get into a domain that has some authority. And so people are more likely to trust it. So, if you get an email from, let's just say, Bank of America, and it's actually showing it's from Bank of America versus, one of those 50 character long Gmail addresses,
yeah,
you're more likely to respond to that Bank of America email with something.
yep.
So it can be all kinds of things that people are trying to do with the sites. One recently, um, from someone that I migrated, their site was infected before migrating them to Iridium, and it was anytime you would go to their website, it was after 5 seconds, it was transferring you over to like a crypto website.
Oh wow.
So they were just redirecting all that traffic.
And a lot of that comes from outdated plugins, right? So I guess the answer is keep your plugins updated.
Yeah, plugins updated, and then also like be careful about where you get your plugins or your themes from, like because you don't necessarily know the quality of the code that's behind that. Generally speaking, people think that if a plugin has like a lot of sales or is popular, that it's good, but that's not always the case. And especially if you're not technical, like just be really careful about what you're installing on your site.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice, and that kind of transitions into an experience that I had with my site, and you helped me out with. I won't go into all the details, but sort of the long story short is that I was working with you to. I had some site speed issues, right, and it did kind of come down to a conflict between some plugins, and so I turned to you to figure out, okay, what plugin can I use? Can I make them both work? And that sort of thing, right? And I was just, yeah, really concerned that my site was gonna kind of slow down the site. But you were able to make some tweaks, get me set up, so that I went in, because again, I don't have all the technical knowledge. You were able to help me out, and I was able to get my site as fast as possible with the right plugins, the right setup. So thank you for that, of course,
yeah, you're
for
welcome.
doing all of that. So in that vein, I know a lot of people are very concerned about site speed and core web vitals. Maybe you can give us like a mini playbook, if you will, and maybe even share some of what you maybe looked at on my site, for how people can have maximum core web vitals, fastest website possible. What are some of the kind of technical steps they can look at?
Yeah, for sure. So the biggest thing that I see on almost every site that has an issue with Core Web Vitals is images.
Mm,
People just upload, images that are way too big for their where they're being displayed, and then also not necessarily getting the ones that are compressed or optimized. Um, and a lot of people will look to a plugin like um, Imagify or Short Pixel, and those can be good. Um, you have to kind of pay attention to the settings that you're setting on those to get the most out of them. But actually, ideally, um, it would be ideal to use a um, tool before putting them on your site. So, like, I recommend to all my clients to use Squish. It's like squish.app.
okay.
It's a website, but instead of .com, it's .app. And you can upload your file there and optimize it before putting it on your site. You can set the size of it. You can set a compression and how much quality. There's like a little slider for quality there that you can pick. Okay, this will load faster, but it might not look as good. And, that's a thing to balance, of course.
Right.
Um, but doing it there instead of doing it on the website, because some of the plugins will actually use the hosting resources to do the compressions and optimizations. And so that could slow your site down potentially as you're doing that work. Um, Another setting that is really problematic that I find is the plugins will have an option to keep the original image that was uploaded. So what that will do is, yes, you got a nice fast loading smaller file, but then you also still have that big bloated image sitting in the background. And
Hmm.
while that's not a problem for your site speed initially, it will make your hosting bill go up because you're having double the images, so you need more space. Um, and
Interesting. Yes.
yeah, and then that makes it harder for like when you go to do a migration. Some hosts have like caps on how much data can transfer at a time, and so you might be copying like 20 gigs of images over off of a host, and they might cut the stream somewhere in the middle, and then you end up with like corrupted image files that you have to go back and figure out, okay, which one was it trying to copy when it stopped, and things like that. So then, other than images, um, kind of back on the plugin side, a lot of plugins will load things that you don't need. So a example that a lot of people use is Contact Form 7. I don't know if they've cleaned this up because I haven't used them in a long time, but they used to load code on every single page of your website. Well, you don't need a form to load files on every single page of your website. You only need to load on the contact page. And so, just like, many of these plugins will not trigger to only the pages that you're using those plugins, and that can cause extra resource drag. There's a couple of plugins that you can use um, to temporarily use that will monitor what things are loading. I think one of them is called like P3 Performance Profiler. You can also use Query Monitor to see what things are asking um, for from the database, which that is huge because that can kick you out of a cache situation. Because if the page was cached, but then you have a plugin that was asking for something unnecessary from the database, it could make it so that you're slowing down your whole process because you're asking for the database when you didn't need to. So I would say the two biggest things are images and then making sure that things aren't loading when they don't need to be loading.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
solves most people's problems.
Yeah. And that's good advice. I have a follow-up question on image sizes.
Mhm.
How should somebody determine what is the optimal image size for their particular site? What should they be compressing it to? What type of file should they be using? Is it WebP images, PNG images?
Sure. So to find the size, if you are in Firefox or Google Chrome, or even Microsoft Edge, you can right click on the spot of your site. Like if you already have an image there, um, you can right click on it, and then there's a option for inspect. And then if you hover over that, it will show you the size that's currently being rendered. So it might be, your picture might be 2000 pixels by 2000 pixels, but it will show the rendered size is only 350 pixels by 300 pixels.
Right.
So that will tell you what size you want. And generally, as a rule of thumb, I just go with whatever the largest, if you're going to use it in multiple spots, like if it's going to be like your featured image, like that might be, on the blog post itself, it might be a larger image, but then obviously in your list of blog posts, it will be a smaller image. So
Hmm.
I just go with whatever the largest image size you're going to use is going to
Yeah.
be.
Okay.
Um, and if you can't figure that out, as kind of a general rule of thumb, 1200 pixels wide is good because Google Discover uses 1200 pixels wide. So if you're in any of the categories that make sense for getting on Google Discover, um, just setting your image to 1200 pixels wide is kind of a safety net there.
Yep.
As far as file type, I'm a big fan of using the Moz JPEG on Squish. That seems to work really well, and you can get those to compress just as far down as WebP, and it doesn't require any extra coding because it loads just the same way as a JPEG does, but it's a smaller file type than normal. WebP is also good too, but you have to make sure that um, whatever system you're using is compatible with it, and some browsers have issues with it too.
Mm.
So what you'll find is a lot of the plugins that do WebP will actually also keep a JPEG copy or a PNG copy so that it will display on browsers that don't work with WebP. So
Hmm.
if you want to keep the amount of storage on your hosting as low as possible, the common denominator is JPEG. That works on everything.
Yeah.
And the squish option for Moz JPEG gets it down there just as small as WebP in most cases.
Okay. I had never heard of the Moz JPEG. Is that
Yeah.
something, is that tool created by Moz, or is
Honestly, I don't know. It's
it's
one of
just one of
the
the
it's
options?
one of the options inside of the Squish app, and it gets it down there.
Okay.
So,
So squish.app
yep.
is the tool. And then you also mentioned another tool, Query Monitor,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
is
So
that
that
what it's called?
yeah. So that's a WordPress plugin that you
Okay.
can install, and what it will do is you turn it when you turn it on, it will put a little bar at the top of your site, and then you go and load a page on your site, and it will just sit there and it will record all the things that are happening as your page loads. And you can kind of just like look through there and it will be like, oh, um, Yoast is loading this file, and you're like, okay, well, does that make sense? Oh yeah, yeah, I'm using Yoast and I want that. Um, you might see WooCommerce if you're using WooCommerce, there's things that load on every page for the cart by default. Well, if it's on a blog page, you might not care about having the cart there. So you can go in and you can tweak the settings so that it only loads on the commerce pages, for example.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things you can see on the query monitor to see what things are calling. But you got to make sure that you only run that plugin when you're actually using it, because it in itself will slow down your site.
Got it. Yeah, just use it to monitor, tweak. Yeah,
Yep.
don't leave it on all the time.
Right.
Yeah, those are some good tips. One other follow-up question on images. How can you ensure that multiple copies of the image are not added to your site? Is it is that a setting in WordPress, or if you just reduce it, say, to the 1200 by 700 size image,
Hmm.
that's your biggest size, you're good with that?
So there's a couple things. If you're not using an image optimization plugin, um, you don't have to worry about it maybe keeping copies or whatever. Um, and so if you're just optimizing ahead of time using Squish, or even, if you are using Photoshop and manually doing it that way too,
Yep.
um, then the other thing is in WordPress themes, they can define the different sizes for the types of images. So like when you're going in and adding via the front end or the back end editor, and you add an image in, that you'll sometimes see like thumbnail or medium, small, large as the options for what sizes you can pick in the WordPress itself. So all of those can be set in the themes file itself. So if you just make sure that it's not asking for um, sizes that you're never going to use, um, and removing any extras that might be added from either a theme or a different plugin. So because every time you upload, even if you upload the 1200, let's say as your biggest size, WordPress is going to make all the smaller sizes that are asked for in WordPress. So um, just reducing to say, if you know that, hey, I'm a blog and I'm only going to have, a featured image size, a main like content image size, and then on the archive pages or blog pages, like a thumbnail for that. So that might be your three sizes. Well,
Right.
some of these themes will come in with like 8 sizes, for example,
Right.
but you might not need that. So you can do some tweaks to reduce your file sizes that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So I'm just thinking about my site. Maybe listeners are thinking the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I've got lots of blog posts.
Mhm.
How can I quickly, without going one blog post at a time, figure out where are all my large images that maybe I need to go
There's
through and
there's a
reduce?
there's a really cool plugin. I think it's called like Media Cleaner, and it's
Okay.
by Meow Apps, I think is the company. It's got a cat for the icon if you do a search for Media Cleaner. And what it will do is it will search your entire site, and it will look at all the files in your media library, and it will also search all your posts and pages, and it will compare the two, and it will tell you which ones are not being used at all. So then you can quickly delete them to clean up your library that way.
Oh, cool.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a handy little tool.
that plugin's really good for that use.
And is that something that Iridium could offer to help? Like if somebody just says, you know what, I don't really know where all my large images are. Is this
Right.
something, Dustin, you can look at for me and maybe even help reduce some of the file sizes to optimize?
Yeah, so I've done that for many of my managed service clients. Um, the tool is not free for it's got a pro version that you'll generally want to have. I think it's only like $30 or something. So I have the client buy that, but then I do the labor as part of the managed service plan.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So those are
So,
some of the tweaks that you can do. And then of course, just core web vitals in general, outside of anything we
yeah,
talked about, like you can help them get that green check mark in
yep,
Google Search Console, right?
absolutely.
To do that. So um any other common sort of bloat or sort of plugin issues that you commonly see on sites that people should be aware of?
Um, Installing anything from Google.
Oh, really?
So, like, for example, Google Sitekit is
Yes.
most recently a pain in my side and
Really?
client sides. Yeah, with Sitekit, Google is trying to integrate like all of the services into your blog, and that might sound great, but all of these core web vitals and rules that Google comes up with, they never like apply their own rules to themselves.
It's a
So
different team,
yeah,
probably.
right. So, anyways, it can add a bunch of extra drag on, calling things that you might not care about. Um, Most recently, I had a client who installed it and didn't go through the settings properly on it. They just installed it and connected it up to their Google account. Well, it put in like one of the GDPR type of opt-ins, and that made it so that Google Analytics wasn't tracking because unless you hit the accept on it. Well, all of a sudden she contacted me and she's like, "Oh my gosh, my traffic is going like way down. I don't know what's wrong." And she's like, "Google Analytics must have been removed or something." And so I went and looked at the code, and it had, like a JavaScript trigger that said, don't load Google Analytics here until click or whatever.
Yeah.
So, just blindly adding plugins, because you heard it on a podcast, for example, that's the right plugin to have. You need this. Um, just things like that that come up. Um, and that brings up another good point. Like, if you are going to add plugins, like, know why you're adding them and what they're doing, because a plugin might not be bad for adding a functionality that you need. And sometimes there's settings that go along with those plugins, and some of the settings are what's bad, not the plugin itself necessarily.
Right.
And so if you are, setting it to do what you need it to do or what you're trying to accomplish, like the plugin might be fine. But as a general statement, like the plugin might be a bad, and someone might even hear like, oh, this plugin, going around the blogger groups, oh, don't get this plugin, don't use this. But it might not be the plugin. It might be that, just the default settings for that plugin are not good. So again, it comes back to you really got to pay attention to what you're adding to your site.
Right. Yeah, that brings up a thought for me. My blog's been around for more than 10 years and I've installed lots of plugins. I've uninstalled lots of plugins and some I still use and some actually I don't know if I still need that maybe are still on my site. Um, I was just thinking, is that something that you would do as part of your maintenance plans? I could say, hey, Dustin, can you like tell me, here's my list of 20 plugins. Like, do I actually need all these? Right.
Yeah, so I do a lot of plugin audits
Okay.
for clients, and not only that is you've installed and possibly removed a lot of plugins.
Hmm.
Well, not all plugins will remove their entries from the database. So
Ah,
they'll keep the settings so that if you reinstalled, then all the settings would still be there. Some are better about it than others, and some will even some better plugins will have an option to completely remove all of the settings on uninstall. But then others will also have a just keep the minimal that are needed if I was to reinstall it later. So
Yeah.
there's varying levels of that, and so um, I also have done for a lot of clients going into their database and cleaning up unneeded tables and stuff that are in there from plugins of the past. And we've actually even found where a plugin was reusing like the same prefix to the table, and so even though that plugin was no longer in use, like a new plugin that they got had a similar naming and it was interacting funny with the new plugin.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah, lots of issues that can come up,
right,
right? And I should probably do that is a plugin audit because it happens, right? Like just over 10 years, you kind of plugins come and go, or you change how you're doing things. And now
right.
I can't remember what I did 5 years ago. And do I still use that plugin? I don't even know. So I'm maybe not the best example here. But so I did actually reach out to you and you helped me with something else, email deliverability. So not too long ago. And again, I won't go into all the details, but there was, anyways, through a service I was using, it caused some issues with my email deliverability that I was sending out to my email list. And which was worrisome. And my email setup is kind of unique. So I had you look at two things. One was, my deliverability to my actual, subscribers, my email list, and then my day-to-day email that I use for more transactional emails, right? Just almost like my personal inbox. And I had you take a look at that, and you did an email audit, and you improved my email deliverability, in particular to my personal inbox. Once I figured out what the big issue was with my other email, I got that taken care of, and then you improved my email deliverability, and helped me out with that. So with that sort of short story, how do you improve email deliverability? What are some of the things that you look at and help clients out with?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is making sure that all the DNS records are there. Um, there are many records that are considered optional to set up, but if you don't set them all up, they count kind of against you as um, we'll call it a trust score. And
Yeah.
so everything you do to benefit your trust score, like will increase your deliverability. So, for example, setting up DKIM records.
Hmm.
So almost every domain that I see set up with Google Workspace, for example, doesn't have the DKIM record configured and email authentication turned on. So that's something that's really important. So the three big things are having a proper DMARC record, a proper DKIM record, and a proper SPF record. So usually when people go through the setup wizards for like Google Workspace or Zoho Mail or whatever, they'll get the SPF record set right, but it probably won't install the DMARC, and it probably won't install the DKIM record. So those are two things that are really important. And like one of the things with your site was you had a DMARC record, but it had a false character in there that wasn't supposed to be in there, and it was causing your DMARC not to actually register as it being there, even though it was there.
Yeah.
Um, So those are the most important things, and then also making sure that it's not coming from your web host. So a lot of hosting comes with free email services, um, but there's problems with um, everyone sharing that same IP, because not only do you have to have your DNS records set right, but having a IP that's trusted is also important with email deliverability. And so, especially if you go and get budget hosting, and they have maybe 200 different accounts on one server sharing one IP,
Mm.
like the chances that someone is sending something bad from that same server as you're on, like it's probably going to make you look bad. In fact, Green Geeks, which is another hosting provider, um, just recently, like in the last couple of days, sent out an email to all their clients saying that they were going to be turning off email forwarding services. So, like, if you had it set up where your domain.com email was going to Green Geeks, but you forward it to like your Gmail account or your MSN account or whatever,
Right.
um, they're turning off that functionality because they were seeing impacts on spam against their IPs. And so that's another thing. So, actually having a email hosting provider. So, like for your email list, having a flow desk, a ConvertKit, people that are actually um, professionals in sending emails.
Right.
Um, and then on the transactional personal email type of side, having either Google Workspace, Zoho Mail, Microsoft 365, getting that and not trying to send your email from your hosting IP. In fact, at Iridium, we don't even allow any email to be sent. It's required to have a third party. Um, and that also goes back to security and even back to SEO and things. If your IPs are showing up on blacklists, Google doesn't officially say it, but you got to think that they're looking at those IPs and wondering, okay, well, if this website is also on this blacklisted IP, like, is that a good trust factor? EAT, as
Right.
we
It's not a
think
good
about it.
neighborhood to be involved with.
Exactly. So we don't allow any email to be sent from any of our servers, for example.
Yeah. But that's something that you help people set up. If they want to set up a Zoho Mail or Google Workspace, you can help them get that all set up and
Yep.
working, and then they can have their hosting, separate.
Yeah, and I
Um,
also do email audits like
yeah.
separately.
Yeah.
So even if you already have like a Google Workspace or something like that set up, um, I do an email audit to make sure that it's got all the extra records that it needs. Um, and then also a lot of times, people will have they've moved hosts and they've moved email services multiple times, and they'll have like DNS records on their Cloudflare or on their host that just like are extra built up. So like your SPF, you know, oh, you got a new email provider, you add their SPF record. Your SPF record like could have a ton of your old services you're no longer using in there. And that has two things. One, SPF records by default, you can only have 10 different things. So if you have unneeded mail services allowed in there, um, like you might exceed that limit of 10. But then also, the SPF record says these are the services that are allowed to send as my domain, and get past, say, a Google Gmail saying, okay, we trust that the email coming from this domain is okay to be coming from, say, Mailchimp. Um, and so that's what the SPF record does. So what one thing that can happen is, um, if you had email through like a hosting, for example, previously, and it has the IP address of your old server in there, um, if someone is on that same server and knows that you used to be on there and they can see your SPF record, they could potentially go set up a account on that host and spoof as you, and it could look like it is actually coming in from you because you have that old SPF record in there that says, you
Mm,
know, 10.10.5.5 is you.
yeah.
So there's things people can do with social engineering there to cause problems.
Yeah. And so, one way to kind of know if you're having problems is if a bunch of people say, "Hey, your emails are in my spam folder," right? They're not ending up in my primary inbox. But I know there's also mail testing tools, right?
Mhm.
So why don't you tell people like what's a good place they can go to see if they're having email problems?
Yeah, so my favorite one is Mail Dash Tester. Um, that they give you a bogus email address, and you send an email to that email address, and it will tell you. if it sees anything on the blacklist for your domain, it will tell you if your DKIM is set right, your DMARC, SPF. It will also analyze the content of your email. So really good for people that do have mailing lists like yourself, sending
Hmm.
out to a lot of people. You can send your email to there first and see if something you put in the content, like let's say that you were promoting something and it had a free offer and you put free in all caps with an exclamation point, that that might trigger. And so using mail tester, you can actually see, oh, hey, this thinks that, it looks like it could be spam. So
Yep. Yeah,
things
that's
like
good
that.
from both a marketing perspective and a technical perspective.
Right.
Can make sure you're sending out good emails that don't end up
Yeah,
in the
and they
junk
and
folder.
they let you send a few free ones per day,
Okay,
um, without having to even sign up for their service. So it's a real cool
cool.
tool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, very helpful. And so we didn't really jump into a whole lot why you and I are talking about Iridium. You started Iridium, you've been running it now. I guess when did you start Iridium? What sort of year and month roughly?
So Iridium, the hosting itself, is about a year and a half old now. The maintenance services is much older than that. That was originally under a brand called ProSite Help,
Yeah.
and I've kind of merged them into one after starting the hosting product. So um, any of my managed services clients, the plugin that I use to manage updates remotely actually will say Iridium ProSite Help.
Okay.
So that it covers both brands for people.
Yep.
So
Yeah, so you started it, a year and a half ago, man. It's a little bit longer. And it just so happens that you're both a niche pursuits reader, and we actually live in the same local town here in the Tri-Cities,
yep.
Washington, which is really cool. And so we had a chance to meet up in person. We chatted. I really liked what you were doing at Iridium. And so I invested a little bit in Iridium hosting. And so I, have a small equity portion there, but mostly just to encourage you to keep going and doing what you're doing, because I love, the services that you provide there. You've got a quality product. You've helped me out now a couple of times. And just throughout this podcast, I've thought a couple other things like plugin audit and others that I need to have you looking at to help me out. And so, like I said, I'm a small partner in the company, but you're really running the show. And so, wanted to have you on the podcast to really just talk about the business. What are some of the pitfalls that people can have when they're running a WordPress site or looking at hosting? And I think we've covered a lot of that today already. Um, is there anything else in the last couple of minutes here that we haven't talked about that Iridium does, or problems that you see arise as done WordPress maintenance, that you want to talk about or mention?
I think that we pretty much covered it. I mean, the hosting, maintenance services, email audits, those can be all done as monthly services, but also do one-off jobs for that. And then, yeah, I mean, as far as issues go, anything related to WordPress, people are more than welcome to reach out and ask a question. One of your readers most recently actually reached out for Core Web Vitals, and after you announcing your investor status, and I actually told him that I wasn't going to help him. I wasn't going to take his money because he was 99% of the way there already. So if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to reach out, and we'll figure out if we can help them. And like I said, if not, then I might be able to point them in the direction that they need to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I love is that people are able to actually work with you. You have this massive background in a technical background, and so you have a lot of expertise, and so the ability for sort of just the side hustle blogger, right, to be able to reach out to somebody and actually talk to somebody that totally gets it. I think that's huge. And so hopefully people take advantage of that. And if they like what they see, right, there's a lot of great packages. The WordPress maintenance plan can do all your small WordPress fixes, keep your plugins updated, um, everything else that we talked about, right? Email, Core Web Vitals, everything like that. Where's the best place for people to go to kind of check out what you and Iridium offer?
iridiumhosting.com. That's where you'll find all of it.
Yep. Yeah, easy enough. They can go to iridiumhosting.com to learn more. Any other final tips or thoughts from you, Dustin, before we wrap up the interview here?
No, I don't think so. It's been great talking to you,
Yeah.
Spencer.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the podcast, share your background, your story. I actually have a ton of things that I want to go and like look at my images and my plugins now, that I know I could probably be tweaking a little bit better, and actually maybe a new process for paying attention to the size of images that I'm uploading on an ongoing basis. So, but if anybody has questions, they can reach out to you. There's a contact form right there on iridiumhosting.com if they just want to shoot you a question, or if they're ready to, get started with anything there, they can do that. So thank you, Dustin, for your time. Thanks for coming on. Great to chat about everything, including Iridium hosting.
Great. Thanks, Spencer.
Hey, everyone. It's Spencer Hawes here, founder of the Niche Pursuits podcast. So I recently read a Twitter thread asking about the most underrated strategy in SEO. One of the most common answers given was internal link building. The reason? Well, sometimes people put so much emphasis on external links, they forget that not only do internal links provide relevancy and SEO benefits, but that Google actually encourages you to build internal links. Now, I get it. Building internal links can often feel time-consuming and boring. And that's why I created Link Whisper. Link Whisper is a powerful WordPress plugin that makes building internal links so much faster and easier. You can quickly get relevant internal link suggestions as you write, and with the simple check of a box, add one or multiple internal links to your articles. And perhaps my favorite time saver is the ability to see how many internal links all my articles have, and to quickly get new internal link suggestions to articles I want to boost in Google. With comprehensive internal link reporting and the ability to add links with the simple check of a box, I can't even imagine going back to building internal links manually. Link Whisper is by far the most powerful, effective, and easiest to use internal link building tool out there. Give it a try, and if you don't agree, I'll give you your money back, no questions asked. In fact, for podcast listeners only, I'm offering a $15 off discount. Just go to linkwhisper.com and use discount code PODCAST at checkout to save $15. So as the creator of Link Whisper, I might be a little biased, but I highly recommend that you head over to linkwhisper.com today to check it out. Again, that's linkwhisper.com, and be sure to use discount code PODCAST at checkout. Thanks again.